you say that the economics is so inherently political, why do you think today in economic teaching this subject is largely omitted, and why there is not that many departments of political economy?
Yes, well, I mean that's to do with the whole intellectual project of neoclassical economics, isn't it? Yeah? Because it has aspired to become like natural science. Yeah? Some people joke that economists have physics envy. Already in the 1960s, Paul Samuelson, who was the author of the textbook until the 1980s, he openly said that economics is a queen of social sciences. We may not be exactly like physics or chemistry, but we are the one that has come closest. No, actually, the trend is even more worrying because with the spread of this view that economics can be applied to everywhere, which really, has some methodological roots in the very constitution of neoclassical economics, but has been kind of crystallized by the works of Gary Becker and later, people like Stephen Levitt. This idea that it is something that can explain everything is a superior way of explaining the subjects that have traditionally been dealt with by historians, anthropologists, political scientists, and so on. That has made economists, in a way, very arrogant. They think they don't need to teach anything else. We have already discussed how even within economics there are many different ways of understanding the economy. But we have to also recognize that there are other disciplines that look at other aspects of the world which are related to the economy. Some of them might actually be looking at particular parts of the economy, but generally they would look at other things that are related to the economy, and they all do it in very different ways. So learning those other disciplines is also very important. This is why we have to be not only pluralist, but also interdisciplinary. Because there are certain things that you will never even kind of see, not to speak of understand, if you didn't learn history or anthropology or political science or psychology. So I think that economics has a long way to go to kind of become a truly pluralist and interdisciplinary subject. The unfortunate thing is that in the last few decades we have, in a way, gone backward, because until the 80s, there was expectation that economists, even though neoclassical economics was already dominant, there was a recognition that there were other schools and people need to learn some things about them. There were recognition that people might need to study some other subject. Unfortunately, it's become less so. So let's hope your generation go out and change that to make the world better.
So, talking about politics in economics, I remember reading Lee Kuan Yew's biography, autobiography, where he talks about at the beginning in the 60s, they wanted to develop Singapore, and he mentions that at the time dependency theory was very big, and he explicitly says, we didn't have time for theories. We had to develop a country, and I think throughout the time that he was alive, he defended his ideas a lot, and it feels like there is a sort of a contradiction or hypocrisy from the sort of like hegemonic neoclassical parts of economics against these different models of being, right? So we may have a plurality, but as long as the structures of power internationally don't accept these other systems, these ways of being and doing that are different, then there won't be a real, development for all these different societies, right? You see it in Correa, in Ecuador, or in Thomas Sankara in Africa, things like that. So how to bring a balance to this.
I have already discussed that the greatest power is to make other people think what you want them to think. Yeah. So yes, I mean there is a very strong intellectual hegemony, not just within the academia, but in the sort of real world. Yeah? I mean, this idea that free trade, free market policies are the ultimate path to development. Developing countries need to open up, deregulate, invite foreign investors. Actually, I will discuss this more. When you have this the ideological dominance, you even have this phenomenon that those who from Latin America should know well, the mas papista que el papa, more Catholic, more papist than the Pope. Yeah? So actually, people in developing countries become even more orthodox in their thinking than people in the dominant countries, because if you're the high-ranking the cardinal in the Vatican, you may even study some of the banned books and try to have a philosophical debate about it. But if you are some second-rate bishop in Guatemala, forget about it. Yeah? You are going to follow the orthodoxy even more extremely. Having said that, I mean, countries that have made progress, they have all been very pragmatic. They were not bound by ideologies. And they drew ideas from everywhere. I mean, South Korea, my native country, had this famous military dictator, General Park Chung-hee, who basically created the Korean miracle. When he was young, he was actually a Marxist. He was actually even tried for a communist mutiny in the Korean army. So actually, a lot of things he did was influenced by Marxist economics. Of course, he could never admit it, because this was the time of the Cold War, and South Korea was supposed to be the clientele state of the United States. But you go back and read those early documents. It's all about extracting surplus from the countryside, moving labor out of it, investing in the heavy industries, capitalist version of Joseph Stalin. So actually, you have to. This is just one extreme example, but when you look at countries, you see all kinds of combinations. You have to realize that this is why I keep saying that life is stranger than fiction, because ultimately, real-world people are not so hung up on whether what they do fits with this theory, that theory, some intellectual tradition. What works, works. So that you need to really understand that economic successes are usually founded upon pragmatism rather than some dogmatism about some economic theory or ideology.
Regardless of the economic and financial crisis that we have in the last decade, as you already mentioned, neoclassical theory continues being the mainstream approach in economics, the mainstream theory in economics. I think you show a picture more of different theories living together, and this is your idea to think how we should make economics research and so on. But I was thinking, like, taking account most of the critics that you made for this economic approach, for the mainstream approach that is the neoclassical economics. Do you think that in the economic science we need more a scientific revolution, like in terms of Kant, like finish this paradigm, or do you still believe that there are some topics or some problems, economics problems, that the neoclassical approach with the strong assumptions that is made for the individual behavior is still useful to understand some economic issues?
Yes, first of all, why is neoclassical theory still dominant after having been exposed for its inadequacy? Because these people who believe in neoclassical economic theory have basically run the world economy for the last 3 decades. And look what we have got, the biggest financial crisis and recession since 1929, stagnant wages in many countries, rising inequality. Yes, I guess that is quite a sad state of affairs, but you have to understand that the academia changes the slowest, because politicians can be voted out, managers can be sacked, university professors have tenures. So Max Planck, the German physicist, once famously said that science progresses one funeral at a time. Sometimes that people have to die with their ideas for new ideas to emerge. I don't want to be that pessimistic because I think there are some good things about neoclassical economics. There are some open-minded neoclassical economists. So I think we need more dialogue. Many people have kind of distorted ideas about these other schools of economics, at least in part because they were never taught that. I mean, they'll get some dismissive remark about, I don't know, Karl Marx or Keynes somewhere, and they think, well, since this was said by Bob Lucas or Tom Sargent, this must be right, and then they don't even look at it. So I think we need to have further dialogue, and even then, I mean, there'll be some die-hard ideologues that what can you do? I mean, you have to keep fighting them, but I think that many people are actually much more open to persuasion, but ultimately I think that the change will come from outside the academia. It will come from politics, will come from the street, if you like. No, because just think about it. I mean, in the 1960s and 70s, most economists claimed that they were Keynesian. Even Richard Nixon said, we are all Keynesians after all. When the rational expectation revolution happened in the 1980s, suddenly all these Keynesians disappeared. They didn't die, they just changed their hat. So actually a lot of people will go with the wind. So I think that persuasion and political campaign and dialogue, those things will change things. I mean, I don't think that economics is subject to the kind of paradigm shift that real natural sciences are subject to. And I think that having this pluralistic approach and constant dialogue and debate is the way forward.
About the 2007 and 8 financial crisis in particular, which I'm personally very interested in. Post-era after that crisis, there's been open discourse about how we move forward, and that's when people started talking about throughout many different areas, such as some technological aspects, including Bitcoin, as all the way down to more governmental regulation, etc. And one particular theory I was very interested in is something called 100% money, which is banks making banks lend only amount of money that they actually have, which is kind of breaking down the major theory of having this credit. And I quite found the theory as a concept radical, and that's what the majority public perceives, the way they perceive is, I would say, along the line. So I was just wondering how you think about this theory, as well as how we want to move forward based on what we learned from this 2008 crisis.
No, actually, we used to have that in a way. I mean, because when you had gold standard and when you have metallic money and so on, the ability of banks to create credit was severely limited. So, the idea is in some ways radical, but in other ways, trying to go back to the 18th, 19th century. Now, I can see why people are attracted to the idea, because basically, despite the textbooks saying that only central bank creates money. I mean, basically private banks have been creating huge amount of money, and we need to control that. On the other hand, you know, that having 100% reserve requirement will really limit the ability of the financial system to support expansion. So we need to be careful. I mean, I don't think we need to be extreme. You know, I mean, you could significantly raise the reserve requirement. So instead of say, you know, I mean, today the Basel standard is well, I mean, it has all kinds of qualifications that roughly, you know, you can create up to 8 times money than what you have in your assets. Yeah, make it 2 or 4, but you know, you don't need to make it 1, you know, to make this system work. So yes, I mean, I see why that idea is gaining traction, but you know, I think having 100% reserve requirement is too extreme.
Do you think that modern economics within academia has a fetish for mathematics?
Well, yes, I think it does, unfortunately, because I mean, let me tell you a very telling phenomenon. You know, this was already a good 10 years ago. I mean, I was sitting in a admissions meeting in which a professor in my faculty on econometrician was raising issues with someone who was applying to do a master's program, having done PP in another university. So his argument was this guy didn't do enough economics. So we had to fight about that. 20 minutes later, there came a candidate who had masters in statistics and wanted to work with that professor to do a PhD. And he said, yeah, I'll accept him. And even some of my the other colleagues said, hang on a second, this guy has never done a single subject of economics. How can he do a PhD in economics? So, unfortunately, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not against mathematics, even though I don't do it. I'm not against statistics, but unfortunately, these techniques have become the proverbial tail that wags the dog. So now people would focus more on someone's technological prowess rather than that person's understanding of the economy. Now, I totally agree that individually we have to be specialized. But saying that everyone should become a mathematical economist, I think that's the problem. It makes the subject much poorer because, you know, there are many different ways of doing research about the real world. Mathematics is a very powerful tool, but you know, it creates certain types of biases. Because if you begin to put the emphasis on math, you begin to ignore subjects that cannot be easily mathematized or be verified with quantitative data. So you will only look at certain types of the problems. And also you know, trying to understand complex interactions through mathematics. You know, there are tools being developed, but you know, it's still not and probably will never be powerful enough to completely replace the interviews and surveys and because if you want to understand how a particular industry works, you really need to go to companies, talk to the managers, talk to the workers, talk to the engineers, talk to government officials who are in charge of that industry, talk to the consulting companies. You cannot do it through mathematical research. Now, once you have done that, you can mathematize some of it, but it can never replace the whole thing. So I think that we, in addition to emphasizing plurality of theory and the need for interdisciplinarity, we should also think about the multiplicity of analytical tools. No, I mean, just think about it. When you go to a biology department, there are people doing research on living organisms with all kinds of methods. Yeah? There will be the people doing mathematical models of the animal behavior, but there'll be people who do DNA analysis, there'll be people who study anatomy, there'll be the people who study animal bone structure as if they are structural engineers. There are people who do nasty experiments with rats. Yeah? There are even people who go to the jungles of Burundi, sit with mountain gorillas all day long and write down what they do. Yeah? But they all call biologists because biologists are smart enough to know that you need all these different methods to understand living organisms because they cannot be understood at just one level. You know? DNA analysis is very powerful, but it doesn't give you any idea about the phenotype. Yeah? Watching animal behavior is very important, but that doesn't make you understand their internal structure or the DNA structure. So you need all these different methods to enrich your understanding. I think economists should try to do the same.